Hello and welcome to Module 1, Session 2 of the training course on export development under Vietnam New Trade Agreement. This session will focus on helping you understand the basic technical aspect of FTA, specifically tariff, rule of origin, trade facilitation measure, sanitary and phytosanitary requirement, technical barrier to trade, and intellectual property right protection under FTA framework. Before we go into the technical aspect, we would like to introduce the concept of a free trade agreement, or an FTA. Basically, a free trade agreement is an agreement signed between two or more countries, under which party or country promise to cut down on the custom duty and also other restrictive regulations or requirements for a large enough proportion of products that are produced in and traded between the parties. In recent years, we also hear about a new class of FTA, which are called the new generation FTAs. These are the FTA that include deeper commitment in old and new trade-related areas, as we listed here, such as intellectual property, government procurement, e-commerce, and sustainable development, which we will explore in the subsequent session. We will continue by introducing some basic concepts that are commonly used in the context of international trade as well as in FTA. The first concept is the harmonized system or the HS system. The harmonized system is used by customs authorities worldwide to identify products when they accept the duty and taxes and for gathering statistics. For example, the customs authority can use the HS code to identify what is the tariff applied to rice imported to Canada from Vietnam, or how many tons of rice had Vietnam exported in 2023. The HS is structured into a system of section, chapter, heading, and subheading. The HS had 21 sections, as indicated in Roman number from 1 to 21. For example, Section 2 of the HS is for vegetable products. Then the chapters indicate with a two-digit code from 1 to 97 for the 97 chapter. For example, here, chapter 10 is for cereal. The chapters are then divided into headings, or the HS 4-digit level, and subheading, or the HS 6-digit level. It should be noted that until the subheading level, all countries globally use the same code. For example, semi or wholly milled rice is always 100630. Country can then further divide the 6-digit HS category into 8 or 10-digit level, which are normally called the national tariff line. The HS is regularly updated, and the customs authority will then publish the revised classification in the National Customs Code. The latest HS update is in 2022. The next concept that we would like to introduce is tariff. Tariff or custom duties is a tax on import or export of goods between countries. There are different forms of tariff, which can be divided into 5 basic categories as we indicate here. The first form of tariff is ad valorem tariff, or the tariff imposed based on the value of the goods. For example, tariff on garment product is 40% of the shipment value. If the shipment is worth $100,000, the tariff will be $14,000. The second form is specific tariff, or the tariff in dollar terms imposed on the physical quantity of imported goods, such as weight or quantity. For example, a tariff of $100 per ton of sugar, or a tariff of $0.68 per head of cow. The third form is compound tariff, which is made up of both ad valorem and a specific tariff component. For example, some countries may tax a tariff on gasoline at $0.88 per liter plus 25% ad valorem. The fourth form is mixed tariff, which is expressed as the minimum or maximum of two kinds of tariffs. For example, a country may impose a tariff of either 10% ad valorem or $2 per kilogram of cheese, whichever is higher. So, for example, if a 200 kilogram shipment of cheese is worth $10,000, the tariff could be either $1,000 by ad valorem or $400 by specific tariff. In this case, the custom authority will apply the ad valorem tariff, which will give higher tax revenue. The fifth and last form of tariff is tariff rate quota, which is a scheme that allows a lower tariff applied to a certain unit or quantity of imports, above which a higher over quota tariff applies. For example, the EU may apply a tariff of 0% for the first 100 tons of rice imported from Vietnam in a year. If within that year, rice import from Vietnam surpass 100,000 tons, then the EU will apply an out-of-quota tariff at €200 per ton from ton number 1001 on. In order to benefit from a preferential tariff under an FTA, a product must prove that it is originating from a member party of that FTA. In this context, normally the FTA often provides rule of origins. In other words, the criteria that will be used to determine a product country of origin. There are certain steps that producer or manufacturer can follow to determine whether a product has originating status from an FTA country or not. For example, if a product is produced 100% in Vietnam with 100% input material from Vietnam, that is simple to determine. However, if that product is produced from imported material, it may also obtain the originating status, so long as it satisfies certain criteria to prove that it had been substantially transformed, as we will be discussing shortly. Once the producer or manufacturer of the product had determined that their product meet the rule of origins, they must obtain the proof of origins, which declare that the good fulfill the rule of origins that had been laid down in a specific FTA, so that their products are eligible for preferential treatment under an FTA. Proof of origin can be a certificate of origin, which is issued by a public authority, or a declaration of origin, which is issued by an exporter, producer, or importer, as the case may be, if this had been agreed and allowed under an FTA and had been provided for under the domestic regulation in a country. The first set of rules to identify the origin of a product is wholly obtained or produced. As the name suggests, the criterion for this rule is that goods must be wholly obtained or produced in the territory of one or more of the parties to that FTA. This type of rule, the wholly obtained rules, are often applied to agricultural goods and natural resources, for example, cow reared, rice planted, or fish caught in Vietnam. Similar to the wholly obtained is entirely produced, which are normally applied to produced goods, manufactured goods. This rule requires that goods must be produced entirely in the territory of one or more of the parties to the FTAs and using exclusively originating material. For example, milk chocolate made from Vietnamese cocoa and New Zealand milk shall be considered as entirely produced under the CPTPP. If a product is not wholly obtained or produced, it can still be considered as originating if it had been substantially transformed. This leads us to the next group of rule of origin, which is called substantial transformation rule. Again, this group of rules, substantially transformations, cover three subsets of rules: rules on change in tariff classification, rule on regional value content, and rule on specific processing. The first subset, change in tariff classifications, is used based on the change in the HH code that we mentioned earlier. This rule requires that any non-originating material used to produce a final good must undergo a change in tariff classifications, which is indicated in the HH code in an FTA parties. The CTC rules can be divided into three levels of the H8, as we also mentioned earlier: the change in chapters at the H8 2-digit level, the change in tariff heading at the H8 4-digit level, and the change in tariff subheadings, which is at the 6-digit level. For example, the rule applied to coconut oil is change in chapters. Coconut oil is a product under Chapter 15. If it is made from coconut, which is under Chapter 8, it will meet this rule on change in chapters. The rule applied to cocoa butters is change in tariff headings. So if cocoa butters with the H8 code of 1804 is made from cocoa beans with the H8 code of 1801, it will meet the rule of origin for it, which is the change in tariff heading. Finally, the rule applied to ground cinnamon is change in tariff subheading, which is at the 6-digit level. The ground cinnamon has the HH code of 090620 if it is made from cinnamon stick, which is a product with HH code 090610, then it will also meet the rule for change in tariff subheading. The next subset of rule under substantial transformations is regional value content, or RVC. This rule requires that originating material and processes from FTA party must represent a specific proportions expressed in terms of percentage of the product final value content, for example, 30, 40, or 50%. So, for example, a car produced in Vietnam, then the rules apply under certain FTA could be the regional value content must be 70%. So if the non-originating material accounts for $30,000, meanwhile the originating material, the labor and manufacturing costs, all of which are sourced from Vietnam, account for $70,000, then the regional value content is 70% and the can meet the rule of origins. However, if the non-originating material accounts for, say, 35 or $40,000, this will make the regional value content reduced to 65 or 60% only, and therefore the car will not meet the rule of origins. The third rule under substantial transformation rule is specific processing. Specific processing rule require that the good must undergo a specific manufacturing or production process to obtain the originating status. For example, for garment products, the US used to be famous for the Jan Forward rule, which basically stated that in order for a garment product to obtain originating status, the production must start from yarn to fabric to making of the garment. Meanwhile, the EUs are famous for the double transformation rule, which requires that the fabric and the making of the garment must be done in the country which the product wishes to obtain the originating status. In summary, we bring up again this chart to illustrate the steps to determine the origin of a product that the producer or manufacturer of a product can follow to determine the originating status of their product. For example, first of all, you can consider whether the product has been wholly obtained or entirely produced in Vietnam. This could be the case for many of the agricultural and artisanal products of Vietnam because we mainly produce entirely in Vietnam or from the material that had been sourced from local producers. If not, Then we can move on to the next category, which is a substantial transformation to determine whether our product has met the specific rules, the change in tariff classification, the regional value content, or the specific processing rule. The rules should be identified for a specific product exported to specific markets. For example, for product export to Canada, we can check the CPTPP. For product exported to the EU, we can check the EVFTA. For product exported to China, we can check the ASEF or the Asian-China FTA. Once we have the product ready to export, we might want to find out about the procedure and processes, and maybe how to shorten all of this. This is where custom administration and trade facilitation rule come in. As FTA aim to reduce the barrier to trade, one key area is trade facilitations, which is the simplification, the modernizations, and the harmonization of export and import processes. Trade facilitation can benefit businesses and cooperatives in several ways. First of all, it reduces the administrative barrier to trade. It will also reduce the overall trade cost. It will reduce the time to move the goods across the border, especially for perishable agricultural products. And also it will allow business to access to imported products much quicker. There can be different types of trade facilitation measures, from measures such as publication of information, which will facilitate access to information for businesses, to measures such as pre-arrival processing, which allow business and cooperative to submit custom information to expedite the clearance process, or the measure of advanced ruling, which will allow businesses and cooperatives to seek clarification from the custom authority on matters such as the HH classification of a product, the custom valuation to determine the tariff that need to be paid, or the originating status of the product. We now move to the next group of measures, which are non-tariff measures. If you are an exporter, you may worry more about non-tariff measures than tariff, as non-tariff measures are normally considered as more complicated. By definition, non-tariff measures are policy measures other than tariff that can have potential economic effect on international trade in goods by changing the quantity traded, the price, or both. By this definition, non-tariff measures are neutral and can have positive impact, as they aim to protect human, plant, and animal health, or the environment in general. Non-tariff measures can be classified under different groups, as provided here. Besides the most common non-tariff measures, such as SPS and TBT, the first two groups that we will be discussed shortly, there are also measures related to, say, inspection, price control, distribution, subsidies, rule of origin, as you can see here, are also considered as an NTM. For a specific group of NTM that have negative impacts on trade, they are specifically referred to as non-tariff barrier. We now focus on two non-tariff measures that are used more frequently than any other measure, which are the sanitary and phytosanitary or SPS measure and the technical barrier to trade or TBT measures. SPS measures refer to measures that are applied to protect human, animal, or plant life or health from risks arising from the introduction, establishment, and spread of pests and disease, and from risks arising from additive, toxin, and contaminant in food and feed. By this meaning, SPS can be very relevant to cooperative products, many of which are food products. It should be noted that SPS measures apply to both domestically produced food or local animal and plant disease, and also to products coming from other countries. We can recognize SPS measures by the purpose of those measures. On the other hand, Technical barrier to trade or TBT measures refer to measures that aim to regulate the market, also to protect human, animal, or plant life or health, and protect the environment in general. TBT measure can be further divided into three groups of measures. The mandatory technical regulations, such as the QCVN on safety for electrical and electronic products, the voluntary standard, the application of which is not mandatory, and technical regulations, such as the Global Gap or the VietGap, and the conformity assessment procedures, which are the procedures to test and ensure that the relevant requirements in the technical regulation or standard are fulfilled. One product may be subject to several SPS and TBT measures. For example, a piece of meat imported from a country to Vietnam may be subject to at least 5 measures related to inspection, packaging, quality specifications, contaminant, and product descriptions. So, any measure that related to protect the human, plant life, or health from any risk of diseases should be categorized as SPS measures, such as measures related to the method of production and inspection, the packaging that come in direct contact with the meat, or the contaminants and the residues. Meanwhile, any measure that does not have a direct link to that purpose but still requires some effort from the producers related to describe the product content, the quality specifications are the TBT measures. While there would be around 15 to 20 groups of measure under a typical FTA, the last groups of measure with relevant and interest to cooperative that we would like to introduce under these programs related to intellectual property rights. By definition, intellectual property rights are the right given to persons over the creation of their minds. These may cover different types of IPR such as copyright, trademark, patents, industrial design, geographical indication, and so on. IPR can provide several benefits to cooperatives and their product. For example, the recognitions, the financial benefits, the trusted indications of the uniqueness of their products, as well as a tool to protect cooperative products in the market from unfair business, for example, the fake or the imitation products. We provide here a few examples of the intellectual property rights that can be relevant to the cooperative and their product. For example, the OCOP, the One Commune One product, had been used as a certification trademark. The box that cooperatives use can be recognized as an industrial design if they meet the specific criteria for industrial design. The handbook that we provide for the training course can be protected under the copyright regimes, and several of Vietnam's agricultural products had been recognized as geographical indications and had been recognized to the National Intellectual Property Office, as well as had been recognized under the EVFTA, the FTA that Vietnam signed with the EU. Thank you for joining the course, and we hope to see you in the next session.